I'm sorry you didn't mess up my name. And everybody normally does. It's great with a name like Smithsimon. If you get an email from me, you think I'm Smithsonian, and I never correct people when they're mistaken about that. Thanks for coming. It's great to be here. It's really fun being an academic at this point in the movement and in New York City, in part because academics always follow people the way I'm following these guys, and we sort of, we'll have a really great analysis about this in about 10 years, but I think the speakers who've been up here already have done a much better job in a much shorter amount of time. I'm up here because I write about public space as a sociologist, and a friend of mine and I were interested in writing a book, and we were in a bar a couple blocks away from here, maybe a year or so ago, and he writes about these wild, crazy protest movements, and I write about office plazas, which don't really have anything to do with each other. But we thought it would be fun to make a book about them together. And the book came out this spring. It's called The Beach Beneath the Streets. It was really fun. The same month, another book with the same title came out. That was a little less fun. But we thought that that was probably about as much attention as it was going to get. And then it turned out that actually maybe protest movements and office plazas do have something to do with each other. And the first time I went down to Occupy Wall Street, I bumped into my co-author, Ben Shepard, and we just both happened to be there because we both thought that we needed to understand what was going on, and we wanted to hang out there and see what was up. So I want to talk today about what we can learn about Occupy Wall Street by thinking about the public space that it occupies, particularly because that's something that all of us can do, right? I mean, Occupy Wall Street, for me, the Occupy part is so interesting, right? I mean, the Wall Street part, certainly, I spent a little bit of time as a temp on Wall Street, as a matter of fact, but the Occupy part, right, suggests that you're making political demands, but those political demands are about taking over some space. And so I want to think about what that tells us, and really what it tells us, for me, is three different sorts of things, right, that we look at. See, I'm used to having notes. I can't do this without notes. I don't know how these people do it. It's about public space as a reflection, public space as a negotiation, and public space as a prediction. What do I mean? Well, in studying public space, what I found is that these plazas, these spaces in the city, reflect a certain moment in society, and certainly that happens with Occupy Wall Street. The plaza that they're in, Zuccotti Park, is attached to this place that's now called One Liberty Plaza. It used to be the U.S. Steel Building. And the story that the protesters are telling about the economy shifting from one that gave us some security and met our needs and had some stability to one that's a roller coaster ride and that has gutted the social safety net is about the changes that happened in that building, right? That the U.S. Steel Corporation represented lots of negatives and positives, but it represented a whole bunch of unionized jobs that paid people salaries and gave them some security and had a social safety net and had benefits. And those very offices have been replaced by hedge funds and investment firms and corporate law firms. I've got a list of them all the same people who sort of thumb their nose at the idea that a society should meet those sorts of human needs, right? That's not what they're in the business of doing anymore. And so I think it's great that it reflects that sort of a moment, right? The other thing is that Occupy Wall Street is talking about the way in which government gives these huge breaks to business while promising that there's going to be some public benefit, but the public benefit never really materializes. And the kind of privately owned public space that Occupy Wall Street is my little ballywick. They're called bonus plazas. And the reason it's called a bonus is that every square foot of plaza space lets the developer build an extra 10 square feet of rentable office space. So Occupy Wall Street, the One Liberty Plaza building, is a little bit different than most because it wouldn't exist at all if it didn't have that plaza. The building's too big, it took off the whole lot, they needed special permission, so they got that. But then for the public space they did provide, that 54-story building is about 9 stories taller than it would be otherwise because they gave us this public space. And this program's been around in New York for 50 years now. It's celebrating its 50th anniversary. And the idea is that developers give us usable public space on the ground floor, and in exchange they get to build this rentable space. And when you go and you do the research and you measure, there are about 300 buildings, there are about 500 spaces now, and most of them, the research finds, either fail to attract people or actively repel them from the space, right? They don't work. We've been promised this public benefit in exchange for this really luxurious private good that we've given the developers, and we haven't gotten anything out of it. And so the protest on the political level is really the same thing that we're seeing at the level of the plazas. And I think that's really exciting, right? Occupy Wall Street is also about, right, the public having a voice in this public discussion, this idea that we're supposed to be involved in this and that we've been shut out by big corporations. And occupying these spaces is about the idea that we're supposed to have access to these spaces that for 50 years we've been shut out of. So in a whole bunch of ways, you can look at the plazas and understand what's going on. And I think that that's because public spaces are a special kind of a thing, right? Public spaces are really, they're not just the spaces, right? They're the places where we negotiate our conflicts, right? Public spaces where you bump into people you don't know, you don't get along, and you figure out how to make it work somehow. And you see these negotiations happening at Occupy Wall Street, even though nobody wants to negotiate, right? The Bloomberg administration doesn't want to negotiate with Occupy Wall Street, and I don't think that Occupy Wall Street really wants to negotiate with the Bloomberg administration either. And I'm not the kind of moderate that likes negotiation, but public spaces are kind of fun because they make you do it, right? So what I'm talking about, a couple weeks ago, the administration said, well, we need to get rid of them. We need to get rid of Occupy Wall Street because it's dirty. Now, I have to say, I was down there a bunch of times, and it was really weird to see anarchists spending their spare time picking up individual cigarette butts and sweeping, and you realize that the self-organization of anarchy can really emphasize the organized part. I mean, it's kind of scary. Like, I haven't been down there partially because I don't think I've got my stuff together. I'm not well organized enough, right? This is tough, but in any case, Bloomberg said, well, it's dirty, it needs to be cleaned, and Occupy Wall Street said, all right, so let's get some mops and brooms, let's clean it up, right? You want a clean plaza, you've got a clean plaza, right? Negotiation complete, right? And then we're going to bring the brooms down to Wall Street where the real mess is. I mean, there's a whole sort of PR side to it as well. We're going to lock arms with our mops and not let them in, and all that worked, right? All these unions came down and helped them out, unions that are used to cleaning the office buildings in Lower Manhattan. So the next thing that happened was this idea that the generators were fire hazards. I guess it turned out that the tents were the fire hazard. But in any case, they sprinkled embers around and set some of the tents on fire and said, we need to get rid of these gas-powered generators. And the Occupy Wall Street folks said, okay, fine, we'll use bicycle-powered generators to power our laptops, right? And then the most recent thing that happened, I got an email from somebody who said, I've got highly placed sources in the administration. They're about to shut it down because they need bathrooms. People are urinating in the streets. They don't have proper bathrooms. And so Occupy Wall Street got porta potties, right? And I'm pretty certain that the protesters didn't occupy Zuccotti Park because they wanted to use bicycle-powered generators and rent porta potties and pick up cigarette butts, right? But that's what they ended up doing. And in a weird way, everybody got what they said they wanted, right? I suspect that the Bloomberg administration didn't want any of that stuff, right? And if they had said, we want you to go home, maybe that would have led somewhere. Like, okay, so what are you going to give us if we go home, right? How about Jubilee? How about debt forgiveness? Let's negotiate that. But what he wanted was a clean park with bicycle-powered generators and porta potties on the side, and that's what he got, right? So public space forces you to do that, right? It means that the people there sort of make up the rules and make that stuff work. The last thing that I figured out about public space, which is really weird, is that public space actually is a great predictor of what's going to happen. People use public space and people build public space to predict what they think is going to happen. So you could think about this from two sides, right? On the corporate side, I think, we don't really know how corporations are going to respond, but from the stuff I do, the first place I'm going to look is the next plaza they bother to build, right? Because I suspect that what they're thinking about Occupy Wall Street will be reflected in the next big bonus plaza, right? By way of illustration, I'll mention that Goldman Sachs has a brand new global headquarters and no bonus plaza, right? It's much more closed off. It's not quite the J.P. Morgan 2-foot stone wall buildings that they built when it got truck bombed in 1911 on Wall Street, but it's much more closed off, right? But we can also look not just at the corporate prediction and corporate response to public spaces, but the public's response to Occupy Wall Street. And I was at another talk, it was for the two books, it was The Beach Beneath the Streets and The Beach Beneath the Streets book talk. and so it brought, the other one was about like French situationists and stuff, and we tried to make it work. Again, two things that don't really have anything to do with each other, but it worked out once, so we figured we'd try it again. And so I was talking about how there are all these bonus plazas, and they're in the city zoning regulations. It says really clearly, all urban plazas will be accessible to the public at all times, right? Not most of the time, not 24 hours, not 6 days a week, all times. And that's really sort of caused a kick up for the, that's why they keep asking for bathrooms and bicycle power generators, because they can't ask them to leave. And so they're available at all times. And I said, and you can find them, right? And I'll mention to you guys, you can find all 500 bonus plazas. If you Google privately owned public space or Department of City Planning, Department of City Planning has a map of every one of these bonus plazas. They're in Midtown, they're in downtown, there are a couple in downtown Brooklyn, there's one out in Queens. And I was talking about this one on Broadway and 50th Street that looks like the excavated ruins of some Roman or Greek theater or something. It's got these two sunken pits. The reason it's got sunken pits is the developer didn't want anybody to use it. So he said the developer, like, to the architect, like, build something that nobody can use. So the plaza's 12 feet below ground. And I said, and you know, nobody uses that, but you can find that. And this guy in the audience said, wait, that one on 50th and Broadway, that's a public space? I said, he said, that's one of those private ones? I said, he said, one of the ones that we can use? And I said, yeah, that one. And he said, wouldn't it be great, you know, they're surrounded by all these Broadway theaters and all these huge billboards for $100 theater tickets. Wouldn't it be fun if we had an Occupy Broadway, where we got people together and did like songs and did a show? We could have, you know, the Occupy Wall Street folks can't use megaphones, so they repeat everything. He said we could have a Greek chorus doing it. And I thought, yeah, that's a fantastic idea. He wants to get it done by Thanksgiving, and I've got his business card right here if you're interested in finding out more. But you don't have to get involved with his thing. I think the thing that's really exciting is that there are 500 public spaces, and that we can occupy all these spaces, and that it's not just about occupying Wall Street, but after 50 years, cashing in on that offer and figuring out what we can do with these spaces that have belonged to us all along. So I'm really excited about that, because public space is a conflict. Right? It's not about getting along. It is a conflict, but they're the kinds of conflicts that, as a society, we can figure out, work out, and resolve. So that's what I want to see more of, and hopefully you guys will too. Thanks a lot.
Gregory Smithsimon. Next speaker.